In Korea, we have a term that makes people lower their voices. It's called gwijup, spirit visitation. It's not just seeing a ghost, it's an experience of supernatural intimacy, having sex with a spirit. It usually happens during sleep paralysis, when you're pinned to the bed, unable to scream as a presence crawls over you. But the real horror isn't the violation, it's the addiction. These entities don't just take your energy, they hijack your desires until you can no longer distinguish between a nightmare and your own deepest cravings. I was in 6th grade the first time it became routine, and it always began with the same awful sensation. My eyes open, the room visible, and yet my body turned into something useless and heavy, as if someone had poured wet cement into my limbs while I slept. Then came the pressure at my throat. Not as a vague, I felt scared kind of memory, but as a clear, choking grip that made me panic because I couldn't even swallow properly. And right after that, I would hear a woman screaming directly into my ear, close enough that it felt like her breath should be warm against my skin. At first, I was terrified in a pure, animal way. The kind of fear that makes you sweat and cry and beg for it to stop. But time does something dangerous to people. It teaches them to normalize the unbearable, and eventually, even that pattern became something I endured with numb resignation. When I moved in middle school, the paralysis stopped, and for a while I believed I'd escaped whatever had been happening. I didn't celebrate because I didn't want to tempt fate, but I did something quietly hopeful. I started sleeping without dread. That's when a different symptom took its place. I began seeing a black, shadow-like figure in my peripheral vision, something that never stood under a light where I could confirm it, but always appeared just long enough to make my heart drop before it vanished the moment I turned my head. Through high school, I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, or imagination, anything that sounded rational, because admitting you might be seeing something unreal is a fast route to fearing your own mind. After graduation, I did my military service, and when I was discharged, I moved to Seoul for work and started living alone. It's hard to explain this without sounding dramatic, but it felt like the moment I isolated myself in that apartment, the strange things that had been quiet suddenly became confident. The first week after moving in, a light bulb burned out for no clear reason, and then another one died soon after. I replaced them both, but what bothered me wasn't the inconvenience. It was the feeling that the apartment was announcing itself, as if it wanted me to notice that something was off. Around the same time, the black shadow I'd been dismissing for years began appearing more often, and it happened most when I was alone in the quiet, when there were no other voices or footsteps to ground me. Then, my personality shifted in a way that disturbed me, because it didn't feel like a normal mood swing. It felt like something slowly tightening a leash. My interest in people and going out, even in basic desires that had always been normal to me, everything dulled, and I became someone who worked, came home, and stayed inside as if the world outside of my door was an effort I could no longer afford. About 3 months into living there, the old sleep paralysis returned, and it wasn't the mild version where you simply can't move. It was the childhood pattern again, the choking, the screaming, the feeling of being trapped inside your own body, while something used your helplessness as an opportunity. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just feel a presence, I saw her, close enough that my brain couldn't shrug it off as a trick. She looked like a woman, but the details are less important than the certainty that she was there and I wasn't alone. What happened next is exactly why people in Korea use the phrase spirit visitation instead of sleep paralysis, because the encounter crossed a line that felt intimate and invasive at the same time, as if my body had been pulled into something my mind never agreed to. When I woke up the next morning, my body had reacted as if it hadn't been a dream at all, and that single detail shattered my ability to dismiss the experience as just sleep. That should have been the moment I ran. But what happened instead is the most frightening part of my story. Not the ghost, but what it did to my psychology. Within days, fear turned into obsession, and obsession turned into craving. I began lying in bed at night, not praying for safety, but whispering for her to return, because the sensation had been so intense that my brain started treating it like a drug, something dangerous that still promised relief. Soon I wasn't living around a job or a routine. I was living around sleep, forcing myself into bed early, waking up and trying to fall asleep again, sometimes sleeping 15 hours a day just to chase that moment. And the more I chased it, the more my life collapsed. I stopped working. I stopped meeting people. I stopped wanting daylight, because daylight meant waiting. For about a month, the episodes kept coming every few nights, and in that half-dream state, it began to feel like a relationship. Conversations, promises, even the illusion of dating, until I realized I was emotionally bonded to something I didn't understand and couldn't control. And then I looked at myself in the mirror one day and saw what I'd become: hollow, exhausted, and terrified of my own bed, even while craving it. That's when I started searching for help. And in Korea, that often means visiting spiritual practitioners, people the West might loosely call shamans or folk exorcists. Because even if you don't believe, you reach for anything when you feel hunted. Most of the ones I met felt like scams, and they all pushed the same answer: pay for a ritual, pay for protection, pay again when it doesn't work. I tried refusing the presence, and I tried moving, but it didn't matter. I moved 3 times, and in every new place, a light bulb failed within days, as if the same pattern was following me like a signature. The shadow sightings grew more frequent, and worst of all, my desire to leave the house faded until it felt like something was pressing a hand against my chest every time I reached for the door. Eventually, I ended up in a tiny boarding room with thin walls and constant hallway noise. Crowded living, people coming and going, voices through the plaster, and strangely, the episodes decreased, as if the presence thrived in isolation and struggled when other human energy surrounded me. Not long after that, I found one practitioner who didn't start by demanding money. She listened, and then she asked a question that made my stomach drop. "Did this begin when you were a child?" I said yes, and I started crying before I could stop myself, because being understood was almost worse than being afraid. It made everything feel real. She told me the presence didn't seem intent on killing me outright, but that it had been attached for years, feeding off my vulnerability. When she began a binding ritual meant to sever the attachment, something inside me resisted, not with anger, but with grief. It surged so suddenly that I felt like I was losing someone I loved, and that realization sickened me, because it meant the thing had rewired me. It had trained my fear into longing. The practitioner shouted at me to stay firm, and I finally screamed out loud, begging it to leave, while crying so hard I could barely breathe. After that, the screaming stopped. The paralysis stopped. The shadow sightings dropped sharply. I still went to therapy afterward, because even if the cause was supernatural or psychological, the damage had been real either way, and it took time to rebuild a normal relationship with sleep. But I'm living again now, and I try to remember one truth that scares me more than any ghost. Sometimes, the worst hauntings aren't the ones that attack you. They're the ones that make you want them. I'm going to tell you this the same way I told it online back then. I don't expect everyone to believe me, because even I struggled to explain what happened. But I know what I saw, and more importantly, I know what happened to the people around me afterward. It was the summer of 2011, and 3 couples planned a vacation to a mountain valley. One of those places where the water's cold, the air smells clean, and the surrounding forest makes you feel like you've escaped the entire world. A friend of mine owned a small guest house there, so we rented 3 rooms for cheap. And at the time, it felt like the kind of lucky, harmless plan you make in your 20s. The kind you expect to remember as a fun story later. When we arrived, the owner pulled me aside while we were unloading bags and said something that should have made me leave right then, but didn't. Because people always think they're the exception. He said, "Lately, guests claim they've seen something they aren't supposed to see up near the upper stream, so be careful." And when I asked if he meant a ghost, he shrugged like he didn't want to say the word out loud. I laughed it off because that's what you do in daylight, with friends, with vacation energy in your blood. And we spent the day swimming and drinking and acting like the forest couldn't possibly hold anything worse than mosquitoes. At night, we grilled meat outside, drank soju and beer, and even homemade liquor. And one couple, let's call the guy Choi, got drunk enough that he and his girlfriend decided to sleep early. Later, his girlfriend came running out of their room with a face so pale it looked drained. And she said Choi wouldn't wake up, that he was trapped, that she'd tried shaking him and calling his name, and it was like his body was there, but his mind had been stolen. I told everyone else to stay outside because I didn't want panic, and I went into the room alone. What I saw on that bed still feels like a burned image behind my eyes. Choi was rigid, barely breathing, like a man pinned under invisible weight. And above him was a woman-shaped figure pressing down on him with her hands at his throat. Not simply sitting there, but using him with a cruelty that felt intimate, only in the sense that violation is intimate. I panicked, grabbed the prayer beads I carried, something people keep as a charm, and threw them at her. Not because I was brave, but because instinct demanded I do something. The moment the beads hit, her head snapped toward me. And where eyes should have been, there were only dark hollows, like someone had carved out the most human part of a face and left the emptiness behind. She stood slowly, and instead of attacking me, she did something worse. She spoke calmly, almost amused, like she was choosing what she wanted next. "Next is Park," she said, naming my other friend. And then she vanished, as if she'd never been there at all. The second she disappeared, Choi jerked awake, irritated and confused, like I'd interrupted a good dream. And when I told him what had actually been happening, he tried to laugh. Because denial is a shield people cling to when reality threatens to break them. I forced him to keep the beads on him. Then I pulled Park aside and told him not to sleep, not even for a moment, because she had named him. And in stories like these, once something names you, it feels like a contract. Park joked about it, the way men often joke when they're scared, and I went to confront the guest house owner, demanding to know what he'd heard about the valley. Instead of looking surprised, he asked me a question that made my stomach turn. Was she wearing jeans? When I said yes, he went quiet and told me a story from years earlier about a young woman who died near the waterfall upstream, and how the body wasn't found for days, and when it was recovered, the eyes were gone. I didn't want to believe it, but now the missing eyes, the hollow sockets, were not just a horror detail. They were a matching signature. That night, we refused to separate, and we stayed together in the living room, trying to pretend the thin walls of a guest house could protect us from something that didn't care about walls. And then we saw her again above us, clinging to the ceiling upside down, as if gravity didn't apply, looking down like we were prey. She laughed softly, wetly, and said, "Choi is boring. I wonder if Park will be better." And Park collapsed, Choi collapsed, and even the owner's wife fainted the moment she saw the figure. I was the only one still standing, not because I was fearless, but because terror sometimes freezes people in place instead of knocking them out. I screamed at her, telling her to come for me instead, and she smiled like she liked the offer, like she enjoyed the idea that I was trying to bargain. We left the next morning without the normal vacation goodbye, without jokes, without photos, and what we carried home wasn't a memory of a trip. It was the beginning of months of fear, because it didn't end in the valley. For months afterward, the presence haunted our sleep one by one, as if it had tagged us. And eventually, Park's family reached out to a spiritual practitioner who performed a cleansing ritual strong enough to break the attachment. I heard later the practitioner was so drained afterward that they isolated for months to recover. And whether you believe that detail or not, here's what I know. After that ritual, the visits finally stopped. But the most unsettling part wasn't even the ceiling scene. It was what happened to my friends' minds afterward. How they tried to twist the experience into something tempting, like their brains needed to reframe violation as desire just to survive it. Because that's how these stories trap you, not only by hurting you, but by teaching you to miss what hurt you. Early in our marriage, we didn't have money, and when you're broke, you convince yourself you can endure anything as long as the rent is cheap. That's how we ended up choosing a semi-basement apartment, the kind that sits half underground where the air always feels heavier, and the sunlight never fully reaches the floor. When we first toured it, the landlord had stripped out the wallpaper and flooring and promised renovations, smiling like a salesman, assuring us it would be clean by the time we moved in. The day we signed the contract, the real estate agent insisted on buying us lunch, and I remember feeling oddly embarrassed because we were not the kind of clients who looked like they deserved generosity. At the time, I thought it was kindness. Now I suspect it may have been guilt. After we moved in, my dreams changed first, and it wasn't subtle. My husband in real life is calm and steady, a man with almost no emotional swings. But in my dreams, he became sharp and cruel, stubborn, jealous, unfaithful, pushing buttons he didn't even have in the waking world. I'd wake up furious, and the anger wouldn't fade like normal dream residue. It would cling to me all day, and I would pick fights with him over things he never did, sometimes crying in the kitchen as if I'd been betrayed for real. It damaged our early marriage in a way I couldn't explain. Because how do you tell someone you're hurting them over a version of them that only exists in your sleep. Then, one night, a stranger appeared in my dream, an older man I'd never seen before, and he told me to press both hands to my forehead and bow, like a respectful greeting. I refused, because the request felt wrong in my bones. But he smiled and kept insisting like it was a harmless joke. And eventually, just to make him stop, I did it. The moment I bowed, he said almost cheerfully, "You bowed to me, so now you're my wife." After that, my body started failing. My chest fluttered constantly as if my heart couldn't settle. My breathing felt unstable, and I quit swimming because even exercise made me feel like I was suffocating. A clinic gave me sedatives and painkillers, treating it like anxiety, and I tried to endure it the way people endure things when they don't have time or money to investigate deeper. Then one day I collapsed while standing in the apartment, and it wasn't fainting the way people imagine it. It was like my legs simply stopped belonging to me, my limbs numb and heavy, my body folding to the floor with no warning. My husband was home and called emergency services. Korea's equivalent of 911 is 119. And in the ambulance, the paramedics said my oxygen was dangerously low. At the hospital, I was diagnosed with a pulmonary embolism, blood clots in the lungs. And the doctor told me bluntly that if I'd arrived later, I might not have survived. Everyone asked why it happened because I was young and had no history, and the only potential clue I could think of was that a month earlier, I'd twisted my leg badly on the basement stairs and shrugged it off. Maybe it was medical bad luck. Maybe it had nothing to do with anything else. I wanted it to be that simple. But then came the night that made me feel watched inside my own marriage. I woke up in sleep paralysis and saw my husband sitting near the bed, and relief washed over me so hard I nearly cried, because paralysis makes you desperate for any familiar anchor. Half asleep, I reached out and touched him, and he stroked my hair gently while whispering my name in a voice so sweet it made my stomach unclench. "It's okay," he said, like he was calming a child. Then I heard toothbrushing in the bathroom. That sound snapped my mind awake more than fear ever could, because it didn't fit reality. We were alone, there were no guests, no children, no roommates. Footsteps approached, and my real husband walked into the room, still wiping his mouth, still groggy. The husband I was touching dissolved instantly, not with drama, but like smoke dispersing when you open a window. And my eyes flew open for real as my body finally unlocked. Soon after that, the apartment became impossible to live in. Mold bloomed everywhere, on walls we'd just cleaned, under wallpaper we'd replaced, even with dehumidifiers running nonstop. We decided to move, and on our final night in that basement apartment, I felt paralysis creeping over me again, like a tightening band around my chest. I remembered a friend joking once that if you think of something intimate, you'll feel less scared. So, in a moment of exhausted stupidity, I tried to do exactly that. Like I could trick my fear into shrinking. The instant I did, something clamped onto my throat with a thick arm and a heavy hand. Not seductive, not playful, but violent and determined. And I fought it with both hands because, for the first time, I truly believed I might die right there. Morning light was already in the room, my husband sleeping beside me, and I tried to call his name through a squeezed throat while he didn't wake, and I wrestled the grip until it released. After it released, I didn't even cry. I lay there numb. And the strangest part was what my brain recorded as a detail, like it was taking evidence. That arm felt exactly like my husband's arm. Same thickness, same shape, same skin. We moved 5 minutes away, and my husband continued to insist I was exhausted, that it was just dreams, that I was scaring myself, until he had a dream of his own. He told me he dreamed a black figure stood at the front door, holding a knife, watching us sleep, and then it rushed toward me. And in the dream, he threw himself in front of it. The moment the blade hit him, the figure vanished like smoke, and he woke up with the same haunted certainty I'd been living with for months. Later, when a package was accidentally shipped to our old address, I went down the basement stairs to retrieve it and noticed something placed like an offering, rice sitting in a small glass, something people don't leave casually. And standing there in that dim, half-underground corridor, I understood something I didn't want to admit. Even if it was just dreams, someone else had felt something there too, and they were trying to keep it fed or keep it away. I'm a 26-year-old woman living alone, and I've experienced sleep paralysis on and off since childhood, so I never thought a few strange nights meant anything. I assumed I was just one of those people whose brain sometimes misfires between sleep and waking. But I didn't start questioning everything until this apartment, because for the first time, it didn't feel like a random neurological glitch. It felt like a presence with personality, preferences, and an ugly sense of ownership. I move a lot, partly because of work and partly because I'm restless. And I had moved 5 times in my 20s alone, so I'm not sentimental about rooms. I pack, I leave, I start again. In this place, though, something happened that still makes me uneasy. I kept planning to move out, the date would approach, and then I would lose the will so completely it felt unnatural. Like someone had quietly erased my motivation from the inside. One night after work, I collapsed into bed exhausted, and I woke up halfway through the night with the sensation that should have been comforting. Arms around me from behind, a back hug, and fingers stroking my hair slowly, like someone who loved me. For a few seconds, my brain didn't even go to ghost, because the touch felt human. Warm, deliberate, real, and the most disturbing part is that it felt good in a way that reminded me of being drugged, like my nervous system was being soothed against my consent. Then logic returned, and it hit me. I live alone. My mind scrambled for explanations that wouldn't break reality. Did I bring someone home and forget? Was I sleepwalking? Was there an intruder? Because even an intruder felt more rational than a spirit. As fear rose in my chest, the thing reacted immediately, stroking my hair faster, almost frantically, like it could feel me waking up fully, and it wanted to keep me in that fog. I snapped awake, and of course, there was nobody. After that, it returned whenever it wanted, and each time it felt less like a random episode and more like a routine it was enjoying. At first, it only hugged and stroked my hair, but later it began to behave as if it was watching my life closely, collecting details, learning what bothered me and what tempted me. One day, after a friend had joked around and poked me under my arm, the kind of teasing girlfriends do, this presence returned that night and copied the gesture, slipping a hand into the same spot, and then it spoke out loud with a filthy casualness that made my stomach flip. "I wanted to do that too," it said. I woke up shaking, and that should have been the moment I sought help. But shame does what fear can't. It silences you, and it makes you try to live around the problem instead of confronting it. Over time, the presence became jealous, especially on nights after I'd been with my boyfriend, and it would return with that same possessive tenderness. hugging, stroking, and then it would say things implying I didn't have the right to give myself to anyone else. And here is the part I hate saying, because it makes me sound complicit. My body reacted in ways my mind didn't agree with, as if my instincts were being manipulated like strings. I caught myself thinking more than once, I hope it comes tonight. And that thought terrified me more than the presence itself, because it meant something had changed inside me. Recently, I woke up and realized I was hugging something, like I was cradling a person in my arms. And for a moment, in dim half-light, I saw a face. A young man around my age, ordinary features, rough skin, asleep like he belonged there. I'm not someone who hugs pillows or sleeps clutching things, and yet there I was, holding emptiness that somehow had weight. Since moving into this apartment, my life has also been filled with chaotic issues involving men, stalking, police visits, drama that feels like it finds me even when I do nothing to invite it. And friends have joked that it's going to end violently someday, which is not a joke you laugh at when you already feel watched. Now, I live in a strange, exhausted acceptance, because I don't know how you fight something that doesn't just scare you, but also knows exactly how to make you feel weak. This happened when I was 20, during my first year living away from home. And I still have trouble describing it because, even as I tell it, part of me expects someone to lean close and whisper, "Don't say it." I grew up in a southern city and moved to Seoul for university, living in a dorm from March until December, and for the first 6 months, everything felt normal. Crowded rooms, late nights, the usual stress of adapting. Then, around summer, I started having intimate dreams, and at first, I didn't care because I'd always had them occasionally, even as a teenager. It wasn't shocking, it was just a private part of growing up. But these dreams were different in a way I couldn't name at first. Because normally when I dreamed like that, I had awareness, almost like lucid dreaming, where I knew it was a dream and could control it, change the setting, decide the partner, steer the story. This time, I never realized it was a dream until after I woke up. I couldn't control anything, and instead of feeling like fantasy, it felt like being trapped in a situation I didn't fully want, where my body reacted and my mind resisted. And the worst detail was the presence itself. It always felt like the same man, even though his appearance kept shifting. Sometimes younger, sometimes older, different hair, different vibe. And yet I knew with a certainty that made no logical sense that it was always the same person. His face never stayed clear. It was always blocked, shadowed, turned away, hidden at the edge of my vision, like my mind was being denied the one detail that would let me turn him into a normal dream character. And every time the dream reached a peak, I would snap awake suddenly, gasping, heart racing, my body reacting as if something real had happened, and afterward, I felt drained in a way sleep is not supposed to drain you. At first it happened once a month, then twice, then weekly, then several times a week, and I began to look like someone who was sick. Dark circles, constant fatigue, falling asleep in class, sleeping but never feeling rested. I tried to ignore it until I finally told a friend, half laughing because I wanted her to reassure me it was normal. And instead, she went serious and said, "That sounds like spirit visitation, and if it keeps happening, it can mess you up." Fear didn't stop it. It escalated into sleep paralysis. And after that, I started feeling watched, even while awake. like the dorm bathroom wasn't empty, like the room had a second set of eyes that didn't blink. By winter, I was breaking, and I finally told my parents something, though not the whole truth, because shame made me soften it into, I keep getting severe sleep paralysis. We decided I would move out of the dorm and rent a small place, and my family chose the move date according to an old Korean superstition, an auspicious moving day when wandering spirits are believed not to travel, because the idea was simple. If something was attached to me, we didn't want it following. The date I remember, because it's ridiculous, was Christmas Eve, and I spent the week before the move lying in bed each night whispering, "Please, just let me sleep. It's almost over." Then one night, days before moving, I slept on my side, because people always claim you can't get sleep paralysis that way. And I learned the hard truth that your body position doesn't protect you from anything. My entire body began to sting like pins under my skin, and even though I didn't open my eyes, the room became visible as if I had, which is one of the most unsettling parts of paralysis. Your senses behave like you're awake, while your body refuses to prove it. I felt him above me, and I didn't need to see his face to know it was the same presence. This time, he didn't touch me in a seductive way. He pressed into me with pain, like needles, jabbing my whole body. And the pain felt so real that when I finally jolted awake, I immediately checked my arms, legs, and stomach, expecting to find puncture marks. There were none, but the ache lingered long enough that I couldn't dismiss it. After that, something even worse began, and this is the part that still makes my throat tighten. I met friends for a meal, and I started telling them what was happening, because I was desperate to release the pressure in my head. As I spoke, they all put their spoons down at the exact same time and stared at me with blank, unfocused eyes, and one by one they leaned closer and asked in the same tone, "Why are you saying that? Why do you keep telling people?" I tried to back away, but my body moved slowly, like walking through syrup. And then I woke up, realizing it had been a dream. I told myself it was just a nightmare created by fear, but the pattern repeated. I met an older friend, told her the story, and she listened, smiling, until she suddenly tilted her head and said softly, "Why are you saying it again?" Then I woke up again. It kept happening in loops, and the loops became crueler because they copied reality perfectly. I would wake up in my dorm room, see my roommate at her computer, feel the texture of my blanket, hear the same little sounds of daily life, and I would believe I was finally awake, until I spoke, until I tried to ask for help. And then my roommate would turn and say, with a dead calm that wasn't her voice, "Why are you saying it? Why are you telling people?" And then I'd realize I still wasn't awake. I can't explain how many times it repeated, because after a while, your brain loses count and begins to break. You stop trusting the idea of waking up at all, and you start bargaining with reality in pathetic ways, testing it like a trapped animal. I considered hurting myself just to force myself awake, and then I panicked at the thought, what if I was actually awake, and I ruined my life for nothing? So I tried to prove reality with details a dream usually can't imitate. And this is the strangest thing I've ever done. I started memorizing book titles on my shelf, title by title, author by author, the exact order they were placed, because I told myself a dream might fake a room, but it wouldn't fake that level of precision. I stood there, shaking, reciting them in my head, until the air brightened and the morning light felt real enough that my body finally accepted I was awake. After that night, I could not sleep in the dorm anymore. I slept anywhere else. Friends' rooms, a sauna lounge, trips with my boyfriend, because I was terrified that if I slept there, the loop would return, and worse, that speaking about it would trigger the punishment again. For a week, I barely slept at all, and I didn't tell anyone, because the fear wasn't just that they wouldn't believe me. It was that the moment I said it out loud, I would hear that sentence again. Why are you telling people? Eventually, I moved out, and in the new place, the episodes stopped as suddenly as they began. I slept normally again, and the watching feeling faded, and I was left with a question that still bothers me. If this was all psychological, how did it feel so organized, so patterned, so intentional? I don't know whether spirit visitation is real in the literal sense, and I don't even want it to be, because accepting it means accepting that something can reach you in the one place you're supposed to be safe. But I do know this. Whatever visited me wasn't just trying to touch me. It was trying to silence me, and it wanted to make sure I never warned anyone else.